Hi, welcome and thank you for joining us today. My name is Catherine Leswing. I am with the Office of Social and Emotional Wellness at the New Hampshire Department of Education. Today we're going to be reviewing some of the guidance for back to school in New Hampshire. And I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Susan Ward, who's going to talk about getting comfortable in the gray area of the unknown.
Thanks, Catherine. Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for tuning in. I'm going to just take a moment to share my screen with you and then put it into presentation mode. Thanks again for joining us. I know it's a beautiful summer Friday afternoon, and if you don't catch us live, then you can definitely come back and watch us from the beginning on a recorded session. So again, thanks so much. So we're going to talk about getting comfortable in the gray area, and we're looking at the guidance that came out from the governor a week or so ago. So we wanted to just kind of talk about like what to do when you don't know what to do. So has everyone been planning for the reopening of schools and kind of deciding, okay, well, what are we going to do? There's been some series of mental gymnastics happening with the planning of reopening this academic year. And if there's one thing for certain, there's really no black or white. It's really just only a gray area. And the challenge in planning for the reopening is the uncertainty in everything, whether it be the transmission of the virus or the thought of children wearing masks all day and what that would look like, and what happens to an educator if he or she gets sick, or staff. And administrators and educators wonder about the mental and psychological toll this epidemic or the pandemic will have on students. So there's a lot of things that we really just can't be answered at this time. So although emergency teaching in the spring happened, also known as remote learning, it had some flaws in the beginning, but it will definitely be a better product if it has to be deployed again, or if that's how some districts are starting. When educators usually take time for themselves in the summer, many have been becoming more knowledgeable and effective at using technology and being a part of different task forces to figure out exactly how this instruction can be effective, more effective for even younger students. So many people have been planning for different scenarios, especially with the uncertainty. So when you don't know what to do, you really need to look at what you can control. And this might require educators to look at teaching with a different lens. So instead of maybe focusing on curriculum right in the beginning of the school year, maybe looking at the needs of students and staff when returning to school. And when facing all of this uncertainty and worst case scenarios, it's really important to explore all options. So if we're able to kind of let go of some of those long held societal beliefs and expectations of what school looks like and what it sounds like and how it should operate, decision makers are really going to be able to refine strategies according to what's happening in their district, town, city, state. And it's important for families and districts to also understand that learning models can change pretty quickly depending on what's going on with the spread of the virus. And communication between schools and family is really imperative at this time. And it's really a time to model getting comfortable in that gray area for students. So having a little bit of that adaptability and flexibility in thinking and how things could operate is really going to be important at this time.
Susan, I love this topic of getting comfortable in the gray. Why do you think it's so important to model getting comfortable in the gray for our students?
So it's really important to model getting comfortable with that. There is no black or white answer because it shows flexibility and it shows adaptability and really how to focus on resilience. So stepping out of comfort zones and maybe doing things differently sometimes feels really awkward and clunky and a little weird, but it also creates the opportunity for growth. So modeling how to handle that and kind of rolling with the punches is really going to be helpful when students are watching, like, oh, this isn't how we do it. How is this educator reacting? So really just modeling that strategy is hopefully going to help.
Thanks.
Yeah. So when we're looking at returning, whether schools are returning remotely or in the classroom, in person, or a hybrid model, the first thing to really consider when you're getting to know your students, you're getting to know a whole group of new students you've never met before, or you may have some familiarity with a sibling. There might be students that enter healing from or dealing with trauma. So some will really be still emotionally dealing with the toll that this crisis has had from March. So some might be experiencing housing instability, economic insecurity, abuse, neglect. So it's really going to be important to incorporate plans to create a really safe and supportive classroom environment or a virtual environment, and really empower those students and create trusting relationships. And the focus on creating and fostering positive relationships at this point is really key in connecting with those students coming in and really giving them that safe feeling. So schools also need to plan for and communicate the importance of rebuilding that community. So, everyone left in March and went to remote, and a lot of people didn't have closure, rituals were changed. And I think for some people, depending on what community they were living in, it really caused an upheaval. So although students and educators are really going to be eager to just get back together, connect after being away, it's going to look different, and really understanding it will not look like when you return to school in your classroom and everybody's there close up and lots of kids gathering. It's going to be different. So there's going to be physical distancing measures. There's going to be different kinds of routines. The routines that worked for years in the classroom aren't the same that are going to be implemented now. There are new guidelines, and some of these things are going to cause anxiety, not just for students, but for staff as well, right? Because we were all affected by this. So when we look at like the black and white images of this is school, this is how we know it, this is how it operated, suddenly we have a new context and meaning, and it's all really unfamiliar to navigate for every single person, staff, students, administrators. So understanding this new narrative of living in and operating in the gray areas will help remind staff and students about how this is a time of great adaptability and flexibility.
Susan, can I comment and ask a question?
Sure.
I love the empowerment of the concept or the language of changing the narrative. It's such an empowering thing to do, and action that all of us can do it. So can you explain more about what that means for you? What does changing the narrative mean when you use the words?
So changing a narrative can really help shift your pattern of thinking. So if we go into this with a narrative of, I don't know how this is going to work. This is going to be so difficult, or, we're going to be open right off, and we're going to be open all year, and really just kind of sticking with this is how my narrative is going to be. And then things change, that can cause upheaval and stress and anxiety. But being able to say, you know what, there are things I can't control, and there are things I can control. So the things I can control is, really building strong relationships, and, working with students with intention, and communicating to families. All those things that we can control can help put a positive spin on the difficult uncertainty that we can't control, if that makes sense.
It does, and your example is perfect. So changing from our negative thinking that we might default to in times of stress, to something really positive when we're modeling what we should be saying and doing.
Right, exactly. So when looking at what we can't control, it's really important to plan for that now And now more than ever is really a great time for schools to create a positive staff culture. So trust is a real huge factor in building a collaborative and positive school climate. And teachers that are trusted to take risks and collaborate with their colleagues really does create better results for students. So positive staff culture creates educator retention, staff well-being, a positive school climate, and a sense of cohesiveness to the educators and that overall culture, so that when staff and educators are happier and feeling more positive and supported and support each other, it really does affect all of the students in the building as well. And developing consistent practices and a positive environment for students is something that educators really can control, regardless of the unexpected changes that take place through the school year due to COVID. And creating an inclusive environment is one way that teachers can also control the environment. So a student feels valued and that they're in a safe place, and when their differences are embraced. And it really does establish a sense of community between the students and that entire classroom environment. So it's really important to recognize that there have been inequities with families too that have been affected by COVID-19. And you'll see that possibly in the classroom when students return. So it's something to consider. And in general, regardless of COVID-19, it's really important to just recognize student differences and appreciate them. And that definitely also provides a sense of positive school culture. And then something really important to consider is really build a sense of belonging. And this can really be done by instilling a sense of belonging through building those trusting relationships. So there are many types of relationships in a school. There's peer-to-peer relationships. There are teacher to family relationships. There are staff or administrator staff relationships. But building a sense of belonging and really building those trusting relationships is really going to be helpful.
Susan, can I pop in with a question really quick?
Yeah.
So we've heard a lot about this, and I know our office talks about the importance of building strong developmental relationships with students. And I'm wondering if you could just speak to why you think it's so important, especially now, to spend time building these teacher-student relationships this year.
Yeah, I think when a student feels valued and has a strong relationship with their educator, their teacher, and that's built when they're face-to-face or even online, if they're in the classroom and it does change to remote learning, that student is going to want to be engaged. They're going to want to work not only for themselves, but also for the appreciation from the teacher, especially if that's a positive relationship. It helps keep that student engaged, where maybe if the relationship wasn't as strong, they might not feel as invested as they would to continue the work and to do the work.
I think that's a really good point. I also was thinking while you were responding that, you know, if the teacher knows their students better, if there is a time where remote learning happens or something changes in the model, they'll know their students' personalities or know their routines and habits a little bit to be able to identify if that student is struggling. And we saw this past spring with DCYF that reporting from schools about child abuse and neglect went way down when remote learning started. So I was just thinking about that too. You know, if teachers have a strong bond, they'll be able to identify if there are issues that crop up.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Getting to know your students, and it can be done online, definitely. But regardless, if there is a change, that relationship is built, that student feels that there is a trusted bond. If there is a quick change in how information is delivered, that child is more apt to go with the change and say, okay, all right, I'm connected to this educator. I feel a sense of belonging. I'm going to go where we go, do what we need to do to continue to engage in that relationship. So it comes less about the academics, especially in the beginning, and more about building that bond. So another consideration to practice when returning is really affirming student identity. And when students are authentic and have the opportunity to explore the components of their identity, including race and ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, students, staff, and families really can benefit. And students feel more connected to school when their learning is relevant to their lives. The incorporation of real life experiences, student interest, and relatable materials can really help strengthen that instruction. And students feel appreciated. And school community is also strengthened when schools value student voice, and student voice can strengthen that the school community, that school community partnership. And it allows students to really practice leadership skills, collaboration, critical thinking skills, and all those things that they're going to need in the future. So it's important also in advancing equity, and really should be open to diverse perspectives.
Along that note, can I jump in with a question?
Sure.
So what are some ways to incorporate student voice in the classroom setting?
So I think there are several different ways, depending on the instruction and age of the child, the classroom developmental level. But just a couple of quick examples is educators can have students lead their own conferences. And when it's a parent-teacher conference, it can be kind of guided by the teacher, but could be more of a child-parent conference where they're taking that leadership role and they're explaining the different places where they're at. And it also creates a lot of self-awareness. And, if there's the classroom that's creating the beginning set of norms, the classroom norms for the beginning of the school year, having that voice and being heard and knowing that they have input is also going to strengthen relationships, but also give them a sense of empowerment. And then, discussions and lessons about solving community issues. And those are just a couple of ways. There are so many other ways.
Susan, I'm so excited to hear you talk about all these different ways to involve student voice. I think sometimes we think we're giving students, a survey or some sort of multiple choice about what their remote learning experience will look like, and that kind of constitutes the student voice. But hearing all these out of the box ways is really exciting to get real authentic student input in. I didn't come up with this idea, but I was at the collaborative state initiative from Castle, and they threw out the idea of letting students work with data and use that to inform their own decision making. In New Hampshire, we have the YRBS data, and that's the students' own data, letting them look at what they said about their risks and letting them make informed decisions about how we're going to support them. I think would be a really powerful way to elevate student voice in the schools.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say powerful. That's powerful for them to have a say in looking at their own data, and being able to have a say on what goes into the choices that are not made for them, but made with them. Yeah, that's very powerful. Thanks for sharing that.
Can I just chime in? And I was thinking, I'm like, student voice, gray area, is this in the gray area? And I had this realization that, all of these things are things that educators can do regardless of where they are in the school year and what modality of learning is taking place. And it really is the stuff that educators can control for their own student body and for their own families and communities. And I just really appreciate that, that student voice piece will really make students, give them a level of comfort, I think, even in the face of the unknown.
That's such a good point. Absolutely. And I was just thinking too, just you saying that, you know, when they are heard, they feel seen, they have a voice. And let's say instructions change and they may move from in classroom to remote or a hybrid model to remote. And that anxiety swells up or that uncertainty, they're still going to know that they have a voice with that educator that they're working with. And that's going to also help keep them engaged, regardless of the changes that are being made. So that's a really good point. And speaking of that, you know, we're kind of talking a lot about communication and developing something meaningful. Notice we haven't talked about curriculum this entire time. And there's a reason for that. So, you know, when we're returning to school, when we don't know what to, you know, if we don't know what we're going to do, when we don't know what's going to happen, and we're creating those really strong, meaningful family partnerships, we can really recognize that families do have some positive attributes and strengths to really bring to their child's education. And providing families with the opportunity to be involved in different ways, even if it's remote, can really help foster those positive relationships. And when a child sees that, you know, home and school are connected, they feel supported in every way. So proactive communication up front will really help establish that trusting relationship with the families, and bringing families together remotely for different events, if that's how it has to happen this year, is also going to help kind of foster those positive relationships. And when students return to school and ask about, you know, you can ask about students or parents' communication preferences. Some might want to be more involved through email or through a phone call, and really just kind of getting their feedback. And school climate surveys allow educators to understand the student, family, and staff perceptions and experiences of what's happening within their school community. So equipped with this information and knowledge, educators can really just kind of from there take action to improve that family experience. And one thing we should really know, and I know that some districts definitely have this and some are in the process of working on it, but establishing communication channels between families, school staff, and mental health clinicians and mental health counseling centers really help ensure service delivery to our kiddos. And partnering with community mental health centers will definitely assure schools and community partners are supporting the student and families, especially during the time of crisis. So really having those agencies and schools working together so that we don't have kids falling through the cracks, if that makes sense. So in saying all of this, you know, there's definitely one thing for sure, and that's that nothing's for sure. And especially when we look at this upcoming academic year, and we're going to find ourselves in some uncertainty and challenges, and find ourselves maybe having things come up that, you know, maybe that weren't planned for. And it's going to put us in a lot of gray area. And if we can let go of some of that black or white thinking and really focus on adaptability and flexibility, we can hopefully adjust easier to some of those unexpected changes that arise. And I know there's been a lot of attention on teachers since March, and some have been positive and some negative. This is just a reminder not to let that get you down, because you have to remember why your cause is still righteous, and remember that you have the power to mold minds and prepare tomorrow's leaders. So right now you have to get ready to just shake off your cape and get ready to jump in and start saving our world again. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen for that and just say thank you so much for tuning in, and hopefully you find our information helpful. We always love to have comments in the chat, or if you'd like to get in touch with us, please do. And we would love to continue conversations. So thank you so much for tuning in.
Bye, thank you.